Today marks a new chapter for Sony. Today is the day they released their first ever f2.0 zoom lens for their E-mount mirrorless cameras, a 28 to 70 G Master lens f2. And right away, I will put up a side-by-side to show you the difference between an f2 and an f2.8. It is not nothing, it is a lot. It is a full stop of light, so it lets in double the amount of light. So if you want blurrier backgrounds for your portraits, if you want low light shooting, this lens is going to do you fantastic. So let's talk about it. So often people want the versatility of a zoom lens that goes to something like 28 to 70 or 24 to 70, but they have to sacrifice with that f2.8 aperture, and sometimes that is just not enough. Well, sacrifice, you have to no more, because this thing right here can do it all. I think this is Sony's most useful lens. If you want a one and done lens that you never have to take off your camera, this is the one right here. So first, the disclosures. Of course, I am one of the cool kids, so Sony sent me this pre-release. It is just a loaner. I have to send it back. I'm putting it back in the mail today, actually. They don't get to see this video. They're not going to watch this video, but I have run it through a battery of tests, and I will show you those tests because you are kind enough to watch my video, probably after you've seen Gerald's and Petapixel. Or maybe Frono's Photo, or Jason Vong, or Arthur R. Still, you're here, and I appreciate it. So let's talk about the build quality of this bad boy. It's a G Master lens, and you would expect the best of the best, and that is what you are getting. It has an aperture ring that turns very satisfyingly whether you are in click mode or declick mode, and you can also use the iris lock to lock the aperture ring in auto or in manual. It has a very smooth turning and responsive focus ring. It is an external zoom, but the barrel does not extend very much. However, if you're somebody that wants the all internal zoom, this is not the lens for you. We also have a fairly new button for the Sony system, and that is the smooth and tight button. So if you want your zoom ring to operate smoothly, then you can switch it there. If you want it to be a bit more stiff, put it on the old tight. I feel like there are jokes to make there, and I will not make them. We have an autofocus to manual focus switch and two programmable focus hold buttons. You do have a nice thick gasket on the back. This lens is weather resistant against dust and moisture. And we have a fairly unusual 86mm filter thread. Now you can still buy filters for the 86mm filter thread, but it is just not a very common filter thread size. Comes with a very solid push button pedal lens hood, and it also has a little peekaboo door so that you can adjust your filters without taking off your lens hood. Let's talk about the lens performance, and we will start with sharpness. For a zoom lens, this is incredibly sharp. It definitely competes with the prime lenses when it comes to sharpness. So to have the convenience of a zoom with an f2 that is this sharp is so great. All the way out to the corners at 70mm, it's completely perfect from the center right to the corners. When you are down at 28mm at the widest end, it is a little bit softer in the corners at f2, but as you stop it down, it sharpens up very, very much. You will see some vignetting and a little barrel distortion when you are at f2, but that will be easily correctable in Lightroom or whatever program you're using. It's a Sony GM lens. There will be profiles and it will be perfect. I don't consider vignetting or distortion any kind of issue when you're talking about a first-party lens that is going to get all of those fancy corrections in Lightroom and in camera. If you like doing close-up photography, the minimum focus distance is 38cm when you are at 70mm, so you can definitely get nice and close to your subject. It is not macro photography like, but you can still get really close and blow out that background. The 24 to 70 G Master 2 has a minimum focus distance of 0.3 meters, so 30 centimeters, so definitely a bit closer on the GM2. Now, while this is by no means a small and lightweight lens, it's actually not that big considering it's an f2 28 to 70. It is 918 grams, which is about the size of the original 24 to 70 GM lens. The GM lens version 2, I think, is 695 grams. I just looked it up, 695 grams versus the 918 grams. So the 24 to 70 is definitely a smaller, lighter lens. But when you compare it to the competing Canon f2 lens, that one is about 36% heavier than this Sony. And I think it balances really great, especially on one of the bigger Sony cameras like an A7 IV. You can just take this around all day. Very comfortable to hold, and you can do everything with it. All of your photography and all of your videography in one lens. When it comes to lateral chromatic aberration, the lens does a wonderful job. You can't really find any chromatic aberration. Now, when it comes to the longitudinal, the Bokeh, so the areas that are out of focus in the foreground and the background, the color fringing, you will see some. It is not too bad, but especially when you consider that this is a zoom lens going all the way to f2. So at f2, you will see some Bokeh present, and at f2.8. If you stop it down to f4, it is completely gone, but I think it is more than acceptable to have a little bit of Bokeh on a lens like this. Of course, it uses the latest Sony lens coating, so flare and ghosting is extremely well controlled. You will always have contrast with this lens. No matter how harsh the sun is or how backlit your subject, you will retain contrast, and the flare is exceptionally controlled. Even if you manage to get some flares, they are very neat. When we talk about autofocus, this is the latest Sony GM lens, so autofocus is just perfect. It can keep up with the 120 frames per second of the fancy A9 III if you got yourself one of those cameras. The stickiness is just shockingly good. It never loses focus if you're tracking AFC, AFS, it doesn't matter. It is just that it's the reason I use the Sony cameras. The autofocus is just so wonderful on their cameras and their lenses. This is the best of the best. With that 11-bladed aperture, you are going to get some of the best bokeh in the game with this beast of a lens. The fall off from things that are in focus to out of focus is just perfect, and the background is never busy, nice and creamy and smooth. And if you look over at the bokeh balls, you put up those fairy lights, you can just see how clean and round the balls are. And that is all I will say about clean and round balls. Just immaculate. This lens gives you immaculate balls. Focus breathing. As impressive as this lens is, probably the most impressive part is the focus breathing or lack thereof. There's none. There's just simply no focus breathing at 28 millimeters or 70 millimeters. It is crazy. And the newer Sony cameras have the ability to turn on the focus breathing compensation. But when you do that, the frame doesn't change because the camera doesn't need to compensate for any focus breathing on this guy right here. So whether you have focus breathing compensation on or off, you're just simply not going to get any breathing with this lens, which is remarkable. The Sunstars look just lovely on this lens, so if you're into Sunstars, no problems here. I don't have confirmation of price at this point, but if I get it before I upload this video, I will write it on the screen right now. So the question is, do you want a 24-70 GM2 f2.8 or a 28-70 f2? It is a really tough call. The 24-70 GM2 is amazing, and it's smaller and it's lighter and it goes wider for those who want 24 millimeters. But sometimes f2.8 just doesn't cut it, and for a little bit more size and giving up a little bit on the wide end, you get an f2. Which one would you choose? Personally, I would prefer the f2. I am a sucker for a blurry background. Just keep it right here on the moneymaker. Blur out all those uggos in the back and keep it on old Benny's face. You know what I'm saying? So once again, thanks to Sony for lending me a copy of this for this review, and leave your comments down below. We'll have a nice little discussion about it. Thanks for watching this. We'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.